French. And hi, Thaisa.
Hello.
I know earlier on we were talking about French, and I suppose to all intents and purposes, the idea of second language learning.
Yeah.
I know you speak another language as well as using sign language. So is that would you call yourself a bilingual or multilingual?
I would say my level of fluency in French is not sufficient to say that I'm, that I could say I'm trilingual completely. I'm certainly more fluent in BSL, or one would hope so, than I am in French. But certainly I could go and live in France, and I could function in French society and, get by with my French as it is currently. So I guess I'm multilingual in that sense, yeah.
I think multilingualism is an interesting concept because when you read the various theories about bilingualism, etc., it does talk about what is being bilingual.
Yeah.
Because sometimes someone might call themselves a bilingual, but they cannot actually write in the language. Do you need to be able to write in the language to then say you're a pure bilingual?
Yes.
I know of other languages, about 2 or 3 other African languages that I can understand.
Yes.
However, I can't speak them fluently. Perhaps if I'm in that community and maybe hear the language, perhaps maybe for a week or so, because I used to speak it, but I've lost the language.
Yes.
So in a way, I could say, yes, I'm multilingual. However, because I've lost these other languages, can I still be a true multilingual?
Yeah. It's a difficult label, isn't it? And so I shy away from claiming any kind of labelled competence in French. I have, really no qualifications aside from my my O level that I have in French.
But is that needed? Do you need a qualification?
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting discussion.
What about native speakers who may not necessarily have studied that language but speak it fluently?
But I think as an outsider who comes to a language from outside, sometimes those qualifications are what enables you to be accepted into that community in some way.
Yeah. I think that's a very poignant point, because if we look at sign language and the deaf community, the language plays a major part.
Yes.
And so if you know the language, you almost become accepted into the community.
Yeah.
Whereas those who maybe learn a language and may not necessarily have the competence that the native users are looking for may not be regarded as part of the community.
I mean, certainly when I go to France to visit, I have family that live in France, so I do go there reasonably often. I can, converse with anybody, with most people. There are particular people in the village that I visit a lot who, it's predominantly French people in the village. It's not an expatriate community. There are 2 English families there, and everybody else is French. French. And we sometimes talk about grassroots or language users in various languages, and we're talking some very rural French here, and some of the older generation.
And they would be the ones who don't necessarily speak English.
But they don't speak any English at all. And even if they did, they wouldn't. It's very much, and quite rightly so, a case of you're in the middle of rural France. If you want to survive, you speak
the
French.
language, yes.
And certainly some of their accents are quite difficult to understand. I
suppose it's like over here in Britain, where I must admit, when I first moved to the Midlands, I found people very hard to understand. I still find some accents from the likes of Gornal very difficult to understand. So it would be the same in France.
Yes.
I know personally, when I lived in France, I was living in Le Mans, which again is a larger community. There were people who actually spoke English.
Yes.
So that was useful. However, there were a lot who didn't.
Yes.
So there was a mixture of that. However, when I went into Paris, again, you find a lot of people speak English.
It's sometimes very irritating. Actually, I visited Paris recently and was speaking in French to people, and because I have an identifiably English accent when I speak French, they immediately switch and speak English to me, and I've just spoken to you in French. Do me the courtesy of, doing the same thing back.
I suppose that's similar to a situation where you've got a deaf person and a hearing person, and if they assess their language and they know that there is some sort of, should I say, an accent
Yes.
in the way they sign,
Yeah.
and can be identified as hearing,
Yes.
that's where they tend to then switch to a more, should I call it SSE variety or an English-informed variety of signing.
Yeah.
And that can be irritating to the hearing person, thinking, hold on, I can use BSL.
Yeah, and I
Sign
think
to me.
the interesting thing about that is, and that's sort of in common with language development and second language acquisition in general, is that your receptive skills definitely progress more quickly than your productive skills. So whilst I may be a little hesitant in my French production, that doesn't mean I can't understand very well whatever they would like to say to me in French. And
Absolutely.
it's very frustrating sometimes at that point.
Not being able
Isn't
to express
understood.
yourself.
Yeah.
As well, and I mean the grammar is quite different as
Yes.
well from English. I must admit, when I'm speaking French, I tend to use the English grammar.
So you've got your own SSE going on there.
Absolutely.
French spoken English.
Yes,
FSE.
FSE or something. I don't know what we'll call it, but yes, I'm using the English grammar, and I suppose phonology in a way.
Yes. I mean, there are phonemes that don't exist in English that
Yes.
English people have difficulty with saying in French.
Absolutely.
Of course, the R
Yes,
is always a difficulty because we don't use that phoneme in English.
That's right.
In the same way, French people often have a difficulty saying the.
That's right.
Because the phoneme doesn't exist in the French
And it
language.
almost comes across as Z.
Yeah.
With a Z, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Yes.
Because it's not something it's not in their vocabulary,
That's
it's not in
right.
their phonetic structure.
Yeah.
So,
I think sometimes people say that, for example, the Scottish may deal better with French and the
Yes.
R, the roll in the R's.
Yes.
But again, I suppose coming further down south in England, the English may not deal as well with it.
yes.
And it's just fascinating having these differences, I suppose, in terms of language.
It is.
And even pulling the language apart. I was listening to something or other recently and heard a German word, and I love the way the Germans put the words together because it's actually putting several words together to make one word.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
suppose so you have a range of phonemes in there. And that's quite fascinating in itself.
Yeah.
And the borrowing that we do. So I was thinking of,
course.
very simply, les weekends,
Yeah.
which is used in
Cul-de-sac,
French. Cul-de-sac.
rendezvous.
Absolutely. Déjà vu.
Oui.
And we use all that within the English language.
We do.
And the French would use les weekends
Le sandwich.
as well. Les sandwich, absolutely. Les sandwich. So it's fascinating how we all borrow from each other in our language. I was thinking of Schadenfreude.
Yes,
That's how you
in fact,
pronounce it.
when you were speaking about German, that was exactly the word that was in my
That
head.
came to mind.
So it just shows you.
Yes.
Fascinating topic.
It is. It's absolutely amazing. I think we should have more of this, perhaps another day. just to
Absolutely.
delve deeper into
Ooh, yes.
idiomatic expressions would be
Oh,
something else
yes.
to look into.
We have fishy stories, French, wormy stories.
That's right. And raining cats and dogs, and French is ropes.
Yes.
Yes.
Il pleut des cordes.
They're called.
Yeah.
Wait, exactly.
Très bien.
I think we'll have to continue this discussion another day.
Absolutely.